Hey class, Mrs. Anderson here. Today's video is on review all the methods of solving. 3.3D, you can follow along with your note packet. The first review problems come from sections 3.1B in your notes. We did solve by square roots. We also did solve by square roots in sections 3.3A. So if you need more examples from this section, you'll want to look in those two sections of our notes. So solve by square roots, you need to isolate the part that's being squared, the square root part, and then square root both sides. Like so. So in the first example, we want to get the x squared by itself. So first you have to start by subtracting 3 on both sides. On the left, you'll get negative 5x squared equals a negative 9, and negative 3 is negative 12. Next, divide by negative 5, and we get x squared equals, now negative 12 over negative 5 doesn't reduce except for that negative divided by a negative becomes positive 12/5. Next, square root both sides. So square root the top and square root the bottom separately when you square root a fraction. Now this example does get a little bit messy here. So first you get x equals plus or minus. Now the square root of 12 reduces, I'm going to reduce it off to the side here. 12 is 3 times 4, and 4 is 2 times 2. So that is 2 comes out front and square roots of 3 left in the inside, over the square root of 5. Hopefully you can get that far. Now if you remember from Algebra 1 or geometry, rationalizing a square root, we can't leave a square root of 5 in the denominator. So to get rid of the square root of 5 in the bottom, we multiply both the top and bottom by another square root of 5. So my final answer will be plus or minus 2 square roots of 15. So I multiplied the square root of 3 and the square root of 5 together to give me the square root of 15. And then on the bottom, the square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is the square root of 25, which is just 5. So that's my final answer, 2 square roots of 15 over 5. Okay, in the second example, we want to get the x minus 2 squared by itself. So the first thing you need to do is divide both sides by negative 3. On the left, the negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1, so you're left with just x minus 2 squared equals, on the right, 21 divided by negative 3 is negative 7. Now you have the x minus 2 squared by itself, so you can take the square root of both sides. The square root and the square cancel on the left, so you're left with just x minus 2. And the square root of negative 7 reduces to plus or minus I square roots of 7. So the square root of negative 1 is I, and the square root of 7 is irrational, so we leave it as the square root of 7. And then over here, I guess you don't really need the parentheses anymore. It's just x minus 2. So to finish solving, you add 2 to both sides. Since 2 and I square roots of 7 are not like terms, you cannot combine them. So you put the real part first, 2, then plus or minus I square roots of 7, the imaginary part second. And that is our answer. Okay, to solve by factoring, this comes from sections 3.1b. 3.1a was just factoring, 3.1b was solved by factoring. So first, 3x squared minus 18x equals 0. Since it's not a trinomial, which means it does not have 3 terms, I'm not going to use the box to factor it. I'm going to look, is it a perfect square? So is it perfect squares? 3 and 18 are not perfect squares, so no. The next thing I'm going to check for is their greatest common factor. And yes, there is, you can take out a 3x. So that's the second thing I'm going to look for. So I'm going to take out a 3x. And if you take out a 3x from this term and this term, you're going to be left with an x minus 6. So since it's just x minus 6 and not x squared, you can't factor it any further. So then to solve, you take each of those factors and set them equal to 0. And you divide both by 3. Or this one you divide by 3 and you get x equals 0. So that's your first answer. X minus 6 equals 0. You add 6 to both sides and you get x equals 6. That's your second answer. For my second example, we're using the zero product property to solve these, which means it has to be equal to 0 before you can start factoring. Also, your x squared term needs to be positive. So you're going to have to move each of the things on the left to the right side before you can factor. So first, you need to start by subtracting 3x from both sides. You get negative 6 equals x squared minus 3x minus 10. And then add 6. We get 0 equals x squared minus 3x minus 4. And then to factor this, we have to find factors of a times c, which is 1 times negative 4, so factors of negative 4 that add up to b, which is negative 3. So that will be negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, and negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. So we have x squared minus 4, and then remember these are our diagonals. So this is negative 4x and 1x. Then to get x squared, it's x times x. Then x squared times negative 4 gives me the negative 4x. And then x times 1 is 1x. So your factors are x plus 1 and x minus 4. Now to finish solving for x, you take x plus 1 and set it equal to 0. Then x minus 4 and set it equal to 0. So this one you subtract 1 from both sides, so x equals negative 1 is one answer. If x minus 4 equals 0, you add 4 to both sides and you get x equals 4. So we get two answers on that one, negative 1 and 4. Again, if you need more practice with solving by factoring, that's section 3.1b. The quadratic formula was new. This was one of our new sections from last week. It was section 3.3b, the quadratic formula. We're solving quadratics in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. The discriminant is the part that's under the square root. It's the b squared minus 4ac. And the discriminant tells us two things. If the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, is greater than 0, so it's positive answer, then we have two real solutions. If the b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, or it's negative, then we have two imaginary solutions. We have two complex solutions. If b squared minus 4ac equals 0, then we have one real solution. So first it wants us to find the discriminant and then tell me how many solutions you're going to have and then find those solutions. So the discriminant using this quadratic equation, a is 3, b will be negative 2, and c is 1. So b squared will be negative 2 squared minus 4, a is 3, and c is 1. So it'll be negative 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times 1. That'll be negative 2 squared is 4. Since there's only one minus here, it's negative 4 and positive 3 and positive 1. It'll be minus, and 4 times 3 is 12. And 4 minus 12 is negative 8. So I will have two imaginary solutions for this example. So plugging it into the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus and minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So again, plugging in -2 for b, 3 for a, and 1 for c, I'm going to have -2 plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac was equal to -8 all over 2 times 3 for a. So reducing that, when you have a negative number, it's really just +2 plus or minus. Now the square root of -8, I can factor tree over here. 8 is 2 and 4 and 2 and 2. So I can take out a 2. Since it's negative, you're also going to take out an I. So it's going to be plus or minus 2i square roots of 2 all over 2 times 3 is 6. Now this one, since each one of these is divisible by 2, you can reduce this. You can divide them each by 2, get a 1, and a 3. So the final answer will be 1 plus or minus 1i square roots of 2 over 3. You don't need the 1 with the I there, but it's not wrong either. So there you are with quadratic formula. Again, that was section 3.3b. Know the discriminant and how many solutions, and then be able to solve with the quadratic formula. Completing the square is what we did yesterday. So this is 3.3c notes. And the video for completing the square just says completing the square video. So there's not the 3.3 part in front. So completing the square, step 1 is a equal to 1. It is not. So a right now is equal to 3, so I have to divide everything by 3. So I'm going to get x squared plus 9 divided by 3 is 3. 6x divided by 3 is 2x. The next step is to move c. You have to have your equation as x squared plus bx equals c. So I need the 2x to be on the right and the 3 to be on the left. So I'm going to start by subtracting 2x from both sides. Get x squared minus 2x plus 3 equals 0. Now I can move the c. So it's plus 3, so minus 3 to both sides. I get x squared minus 2x. I'm going to add a plus blank in here now, and -3 plus blank. I add the blanks, 2 reasons. First, I have the pluses here, reminds me whatever I am putting in those blanks is always positive, and then I remember to do it to both sides. That's where you add, you take your b term divided by 2 and square it. So this will be -2 divided by 2 and square that. -2 divided by 2 is -1. -1 squared is 1. Then you factor and simplify. So we have a perfect square trinomial now on the left. It'll factor to x minus 1 squared, because first -1 here is what we got, so that's what goes here. But also because -1 times -1 is +1, and -1 plus -1 is -2. So that's how that factors on the left side there. And that's equal to -3 plus 1 is -2. Now you can finish solving by square roots. So square root both sides. On this side you get x minus 1 equals square root of -2 is positive and negative I square roots of 2. Last step, add 1 to both sides. And you can't combine a real and imaginary number. It makes a complex number. The real part comes first. 1 plus or minus the imaginary part comes second. So 1 plus or minus I square roots of 2. We're going to do one more completing the square. This is one that has a fraction in it. So does a equal 1? No, it's -6. We have to divide everything by -6. So I'm going to get x squared. 6x divided by -6 is -x. 3 divided by -6 is -1/2. Equals 0 divided by -6 is 0. Okay, then move c. So add 1/2 to both sides. Oops. So x squared minus x plus blank equals 1/2 plus blank. Then take b and divide it by 2 and square it. So your b here is -1. So -1 divided by 2 squared will be -1 squared is 1 and 2 squared is 4. So you're going to add 1/4 to both sides. Then you will factor this side. Remember, whatever you had here goes in the parentheses down here. So this factors to x minus 1/2 squared, because -1/2 times -1/2 is 1/4. -1/2 plus -1/2 is -1. So that's why it factors like that. Then 1/2 plus 1/4. You need a common denominator. 1/2, if I multiply both 1 and 2 by 2, I get 2/4. Then I have a common denominator. 2/4 plus 1/4 is 3/4. I showed a couple of people in class how to do the fractions in the calculator yesterday, so ask around. Maybe someone can help you if you're not good with adding fractions and getting a common denominator. Square root both sides, square root a fraction, square root the top and bottom separately. Get x minus 1/2 equals plus or minus the square root of 3 stays the square root of 3. Square root of 4 is 2. Last step, add 1/2. Final answer, these are rational and irrational numbers, so I put the 1/2 out front, plus or minus the square root of 3 over 2. Final answer. Remember that completing the square is just what we did just yesterday, which is 3.3c. Notes, the video is completing the square. The quiz looks very similar to this review. It has the same questions in the same order. Not the same questions, but similar questions. Solve by square root, solve by factor, solve by quadratic formula, solve by completing the square. Please complete 3.3D worksheet, and the quiz will be next period. Thank you.